I don't know how else to put it. I'm in angst. That's the only word that comes close to what I've been feeling. Everything around me feels surreal right now, like I'm watching my own life through a foggy window. I walk through the house and nothing feels like mine anymore, even though nothing has actually changed. The same furniture, the same carpet, the same creak in the third step on the staircase that I always meant to fix and never did. Everything is exactly where it was, and yet none of it feels real. My wife and I were together for 35 years. 35 years. I don't think most people stop and actually sit with that number. That's more than half my life. That's longer than most friendships last, longer than most careers, longer than a lot of people are even alive. 35 years means you've seen each other through everything, the good years and the bad ones. The years when money was tight and you ate the same cheap meals 3 nights in a row. The years when things finally got easier and you thought, okay, we made it. You've shared a bed for so long that you stop noticing the other person is there, and then one day they're not, and suddenly you can't sleep because the silence is too loud. We got married young. Her family thought it was too soon. My family thought it was too soon, too soon. My family thought it was too soon. Looking back, maybe they had a point, but we didn't care. When you're young and you're certain about something, no one can talk you out of it. And I was certain about her from the very beginning. We met at a mutual friends gathering. Nothing fancy. Someone's apartment, bad music playing in the background, people standing around with drinks in their hands pretending to be more interesting than they were. I was never great at those kinds of events. I'm still not. I tend to find a spot near the wall and wait until it feels acceptable to leave. That's exactly what I was doing when she walked over to me. She didn't walk over to flirt. She told me years later that she thought I looked bored and a little lost, and she felt sorry for me. That's the real story. Not some romantic spark across a crowded room. Just a woman who took pity on a man standing by the wall holding a drink he didn't even want. But we talked for hours. Genuinely talked. The way you almost never do with someone you've just met. About where we came from. About what we wanted. About the things we were afraid of and the things we hoped for. She had this way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying actually mattered. Not just nodding and waiting for her turn to speak. Really listening, taking it in. And when she responded, she meant it. By the time people started leaving, neither of us had noticed the time. We stood outside in the cold for another hour just to keep the conversation going. When we finally said goodnight, I already knew I wasn't going to be able to stop thinking about her. We got married about a year later. Simple ceremony. Just family and close friends. She wore a dress she'd found at a second-hand shop and altered herself, and she looked more beautiful in it than anyone I'd ever seen. I wore a suit that was slightly too tight in the shoulders and pretended it wasn't. We wrote our own vows, which was her idea, and I was terrified to do it. I'm not a man who puts feelings into words easily. But I stood up there and I said what I meant, and when I looked at her while I was saying it, I knew I was telling the truth. The early years were hard in the way that young marriages often are. We didn't have much money. We lived in a small apartment where the heating worked when it felt like it, and the upstairs neighbor apparently moved furniture every single night. We argued about small things. We learned each other's worst habits. We figured out how to apologize. We figured out how to let things go. And slowly, without either of us really planning it, we built something that felt solid. Something that felt like it belonged to us. About 10 years in, we decided we were ready to have a child. I remember how happy she was when we found out. Not excited in an over-the-top way, not screaming or jumping around. Just quietly, deeply happy. She sat at the kitchen table with the test in her hand, and smiled to herself like she was keeping a secret from the rest of the world. I sat down across from her and she looked up at me, and that was enough. We didn't need to say anything. The pregnancy went the way pregnancies go. There were good days and harder days. She was tired a lot in the beginning. She had cravings that made absolutely no sense. She read every book she could find and then argued with things the books said. She was careful and thoughtful, and when she was scared, she tried not to show it, but I could always tell. Partway through, the doctors told us we were having a boy. We started preparing. Bought clothes, bought toys, talked about names. She had opinions about everything, and I mostly agreed because her opinions were usually better than mine. We painted the spare room, put together the crib, stood back and looked at it and said to each other, okay, this is really happening. And then the day came. I was at work when she called. Her voice was steady, almost too steady, the kind of voice you use when you're trying hard not to alarm someone. She told me her water had broken. She said her mother was with her and they were heading to the hospital. And then she told me to stay at work. I told her she was out of her mind. She told me she was serious. Stay at work. Finish the day. There was nothing for me to do there, and she didn't want me hovering around a hospital waiting room for hours getting in everyone's way. I pushed back. I told her there was no way I wasn't going to be there for the birth of my own child. She raised her voice at me, which she almost never did. She told me firmly, almost desperately, to stay where I was. I didn't understand it. I told myself it was nerves, or hormones, or just the stress of the moment. I told myself I'd go as soon as my shift ended, so I waited. It was the longest afternoon of my life. Every hour felt like 3. I couldn't focus on anything. I kept checking the clock. I called her a few times and got no answer. I told myself that was normal, that they were busy, that everything was fine. The moment I clocked out, I drove straight to the hospital, and she wasn't there. I asked at the front desk. I checked the maternity ward. I walked the hallways. No one had any record of her. I was starting to spiral, genuinely starting to panic, running through worst-case scenarios in my head when my pager went off. It was her number. I found a phone and called her back. She picked up on the second ring and asked me in a perfectly calm voice where I was and why I wasn't home yet. She was already home. I drove back in a daze. I don't remember much of that drive. I just remember pulling up to the house and sitting in the car for a moment before going inside, trying to make sense of what was happening. When I walked in, she was in the living room, sitting in her chair, the old one she'd had since before we were married, the one with the worn arms that I'd tried to get rid of at least 4 times over the years. She was wrapped in a blanket, and she was holding a baby. She looked exhausted, more than exhausted, hollowed out, like something had been taken from her and put back slightly wrong. I sat down on the edge of the coffee table across from her and looked at her. And then I looked at the baby, and I said, "That's a girl." She said yes. I told her the doctors had said we were having a boy. 9 months they had told us that. Multiple appointments. She told me there had been a mistake with the paperwork. I sat there for a moment with that explanation. It didn't quite fit. But I looked at the baby, and the baby was real, and the baby was here, and I was a father. Whatever confusion I felt, whatever questions I had, they weren't bigger than that moment. So I let them go. I told myself it didn't matter. A paperwork mix-up, an expensive one. But still, we had a daughter. I had a daughter. I reached out and she let me hold her. And that was it. That was the moment. Whatever I had been before, I was a father now. That first night, we all slept in the same bed. The 3 of us. I barely slept at all. I just lay there listening to them breathe, one hand resting on my wife's back, the baby tucked in between us. Every time the baby stirred, I was awake before she could cry. pick her up and walk her around the room in the dark, slow circles until she settled. I had waited 9 months to be a father. I had no idea what it would feel like. And then it felt like the most obvious thing in the world. Like something I had always been. Just waiting to start. From that point on, everything I did was for them. I worked hard. I had always worked hard. But now there was a different reason behind it. I picked up extra shifts when they were offered. I looked for better opportunities and took them when they came. I kept food on the table and the lights on and the bills paid. I saved up for things that mattered. A better car so my wife could drive safely. A swing set for the backyard. Birthday gifts that my daughter would actually remember. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just doing what fathers do, or what I believed fathers should do. And watching her grow up was something I am not sure I have the right words for even now. She went from being completely helpless, this tiny creature who needed everything, to a person with opinions and jokes and preferences and moods. The first time she walked across the living room on her own, she looked so proud of herself that I laughed out loud. The first day of school, she didn't cry, which surprised everyone who knew her because she was dramatic about a lot of things. But she walked in like she owned the place. And I stood in the parking lot for too long after she disappeared through the doors. Every stage brought something new. Every year she was a slightly different person, building on the last version of herself. I watched all of it. Soccer games in the rain, school plays where she forgot half her lines and improvised badly, science projects that did not work as planned, friendships that started and ended and sometimes started again. The first time she came home heartbroken over something and didn't want to tell me what it was. The first time she asked for advice and actually listened to what I said. People used to comment sometimes that she didn't look much like either of us. We'd shrug it off. Genetics are unpredictable. She's her own person. No one thought much of it, including me. She was my daughter. I had never once needed a reason to believe that. Then her mother got sick. I won't pretend there's a gentle way to say it. Cancer doesn't arrive gently. It arrives like a phone call you don't want to answer, and then it stays, and everything else in your life has to rearrange itself around it. She was diagnosed during what had been, up to that point, a pretty ordinary week. And then the week wasn't ordinary anymore, and nothing after it was either. The years that followed were the hardest of my life. I say that knowing I've had other hard years, but watching someone you love get diminished by something you can't fight for them is its own particular kind of suffering. She lost weight. She lost her hair. She lost the energy that had always been so characteristic of her. That liveliness I had noticed the very first night I met her. There were good stretches, and there were terrible ones. There were mornings when she sat at the kitchen table drinking her tea and seemed almost like herself. And there were nights when I sat next to her bed and held her hand and didn't say anything because there was nothing useful to say. Our daughter came home as often as she could. She was at university by then, 100 miles away, and she rearranged her life around hospital visits and phone calls and coming home for weekends. The two of them would spend hours talking when she visited. I would find reasons to be in another part of the house, to give them space. But sometimes I'd stand in the hallway and listen to them laugh about something. And I would feel grateful beyond what I could express that they had that time together. I was there every day, right through to the end. Except that the actual end came on a Tuesday afternoon when our daughter was in class and I was alone. I had told her to go back. Her mother had told her too. We both knew the timeline. We both understood that it could be any day. But her mother had been insistent in that last week that our daughter keep living her life. Go to class. Do the normal things. Don't sit in a hospital room waiting for something terrible to happen. So she wasn't there, and I was sitting in the chair next to the bed, and the room was quiet, and the machines were making their sounds, and I was holding her hand the way I had held it for 35 years. She opened her eyes. She looked at me the way she used to look at me when we were young, before life got complicated. Full of recognition. Full of something that I can only call love. Even though that word has been used so many times, it's almost lost its meaning. She looked at me like I was someone worth looking at. She said, "You're here." I said, "I'm here." She smiled. A small, tired smile. And for a moment, everything was okay. For a moment, it was just us. The way it had always been just us. Two people who had chosen each other and kept choosing each other for 35 years. And then her face changed. The smile went away. Her brow furrowed. And she started to cry. Not the way people cry when they're sad, but the way they cry when something has been held in for a very long time and can't be held anymore. She said she needed to tell me something. I told her she didn't have to. She said she did. And then she told me. Our son died at birth. She said there had been complications. She said they tried everything they could and it wasn't enough. She said, when they told her, something in her broke. Not the kind of thing that heals. The kind that just rearranges how you work permanently. She said she couldn't accept it. She said another woman had given birth that same night in the same hospital and had died. The baby had survived and had no one. And a nurse who knew my wife, who knew what she had just been through, had done something she should never have done. Whether out of compassion or poor judgment or some combination of the two, she had made something possible that should not have been made possible. My wife said she hadn't planned it. She said it wasn't something she thought through or decided rationally. She said when she held that baby, she just couldn't let go. She said she knew it was wrong. She had always known it was wrong. She had carried that knowledge for 35 years, every single day, and had never found a way to put it down. She asked me to forgive her. I didn't say anything. Not because I couldn't. Not because I was so overwhelmed with anger that I was speechless. I just didn't have any words that felt adequate to the moment. No words that were big enough, or honest enough, or right enough. She died that night, and I have been sitting with this ever since. I want to be clear about something, because the title of this story probably sounds like something it isn't. I'm not glad my wife is dead. I will never be glad my wife is dead. 35 years. You don't walk away from 35 years and feel anything clean. What I mean is something harder to explain. I mean, that part of me is relieved she finally set it down. That she didn't have to carry it anymore. That whatever comes after this life, she's not still lying awake with that weight on her chest. That's the only way I know how to mean it. Now, I sit here in the house we shared. I sit in her chair, the old one with the worn arms. I never got rid of it. I'm glad I didn't. I think about my daughter. She's 100 miles away, living her life, grieving her mother, not knowing that the word mother holds more layers than she's ever been told. She has no idea that somewhere out in the world, there may be people who are connected to her by blood. People who never got to know her. People who may have spent years wondering. Or maybe there's no one. Maybe that chapter closed completely the night she was born, with no one left to hold it open. I don't know. I haven't let myself look yet. I think about the nurse. I wonder if she's still alive. I wonder if she ever told anyone. I wonder if she made peace with what she did, and whether peace was something she deserved to make. And I think about my wife, about what it cost to live with a secret for 35 years, to kiss your daughter goodnight every night knowing what you know, to build a family on top of something that was never yours to take. to love that family completely and genuinely, because I believe she did. I believe she loved us with everything she had, and to still carry the weight of the wrong thing underneath all of it. I don't hate her. I've tried to find something like anger, and I can't locate it. What I find instead is something closer to grief, and under the grief, something that might be compassion. Not the easy kind. Not the kind that excuses anything. Just the recognition that she was a person who broke under an unbearable weight, and then spent the rest of her life trying to hold everything together anyway. That doesn't make it right. I want to say that clearly. What happened was wrong in ways that go beyond her, beyond me, beyond our family. There is a story that belongs to my daughter that she's never been told. There may be a history she doesn't know she has. That matters. It matters more than my comfort, more than my grief, more than the memory I want to protect. She called me last week, just to check in, the way she does now that her mother is gone. A little more often, a little more carefully. Her voice had that quality it gets sometimes where she's trying to sound normal, but she's actually checking to make sure I'm still okay. I told her I was fine. I told her I was going to come visit soon. She said she'd like that. I said there was something I needed to talk to her about. There was a pause. She asked if everything was all right. I told her everything was all right. I told her it wasn't an emergency, but I told her there was something she needed to know, and I wanted to tell her in person. She said okay. We said goodnight. I hung up the phone and sat in the dark for a long time. I don't know how to begin that conversation. I've turned it over 100 times, and I still don't have the right words. Maybe there are no right words. Maybe you just sit down across from someone you love and you tell them the truth, and you let it be what it is. She is my daughter. Whatever any document says, whatever the biology says, that is a fact that nothing can touch. She grew up in this house. She sat at that kitchen table. She drove me crazy and made me proud, and called me when she needed advice and called me when she didn't, just to talk. That is 30 years of real life. That is not nothing. That is everything. But she deserves to know where she comes from. She deserves the chance to ask questions, to search if she wants to decide for herself what to do with the truth. That is not my decision to make for her. I made the mistake of carrying a secret that wasn't mine to carry, even though I didn't know I was doing it. I won't make that mistake now. So I'll go see her. I'll sit down with her. I'll start talking. I don't know what happens after that, but I know that 35 years of silence is enough. It's more than enough. And she deserves better than that from me.